Welcome to a walk through Dickensian London. This video was originally uploaded just as a walking London video, but today we'll turn it into a Dickensian walk, and I will inform you about all the Dickens locations on this walk from London Bridge to St Katharine Docks. Our walk starts, well, as I mentioned, on London Bridge, and Dickens wrote about it many times, sometimes referring to the old one and sometimes to the 1832 reconstruction. It was over the former that Pip, in great expectations, walked in agonies of despair upon hearing that Estella was to marry Drummle. And here is Southwark Cathedral. We'll talk about that in a minute. But let's just stay with London Bridge for a minute, because David Copperfield was wont to sit in one of the old stone recesses watching the people go by, or to look over the balustrades at the sun shining in the water and lighting up the golden flame on top of the monument. Now we'll come to the monument later, because we will cross London Bridge like so many of Dickens' characters used to do too, but now we're going to Borough Market, and as you can see, when I recorded the walk back in February of 2022, it was on a Thursday evening, I think, Thursday evening after work, kind of rush hour video, and there were quite a lot of people out on the streets. So yeah, we're in Borough Market, said to be the oldest fruit and vegetable market in London, and the market has retained its steel and glass structure dating from 1851 and still has a decidedly Victorian air. Dickens used it as a setting in Pickwick Papers, when a very drunk Bob Sawyer, attempting to find his way home, double knocks at the door of the Borough Market office and takes short naps on the steps, under the firm impression he lived here and had forgotten the key. Well, Bob Sawyer didn't live here, and I didn't meet him on my walk. But yeah, we're going to Southwark Cathedral now, so we are on the southern side of the River Thames, obviously, on the south bank, and here's another look at Southwark Cathedral. So inside you can find the tomb of John Gower, who died in 1408. The church did not become a cathedral until 1905, so Dickens would have known it as St Saviour's. In his essay City of London Churches in the Uncommercial Traveller, he wrote that he was profoundly ignorant of the names of at least 9/10 of London's churches. Saving that I know the church of old Gower's tomb, he lies in effigy with his head upon his books, to be the church of St Saviour's, Southwark. Today Gower's colourful effigy still reclines exactly as Dickens described, and an information board details his achievements as the first English poet. Inside you can also admire the memorial to William Shakespeare and the window above, resplendent with sundry characters from his plays. Well, the Shakespeare connection is obvious because, well, the South Bank and Southwark, this was the area, those were the areas of Shakespeare, and of course the famous Globe Theatre used to stand nearby. So this area would have been familiar to Dickens, of course, it would have been, and also some of the sites, the look over the Thames, that is familiar to us. Some of it would have been very familiar to him too, like the Dome of St Paul's, and of course also the mudlarkers at the Thames. They would have been familiar to him, just like they are familiar to us, although the business and the trade has changed. They have changed since the days of Dickens. So talking of mudlarkers and mudlarking, Charles Dickens' last complete novel, Our Mutual Friend, opens right here on this part of the river. The opening lines talk of a small boat being rowed along this stretch of the river between two bridges. London Bridge, which we will see in a minute, over to the right, and Southwark Bridge on the left. But nowadays Southwark Bridge is obscured by the Cannon Street Railway Bridge, which wasn't there at the time when Dickens wrote Our Mutual Friend, which would have been 1864 to 1865. So as I mentioned, well, no, I didn't mention it yet. So we have a little boat. Oh, I think I did mention it. So we have a little boat being rowed between these two bridges, Southwark Bridge and London Bridge, and there are two people in it, and one of them is Jesse Haxham, known as Gaffer Haxham, a man, and he's scanning the river. He's looking for something, and the other person is his daughter Lizzie. She's rowing the boat, and suddenly Gaffer sees something in the water. He turns over the boat, and they come to what he has seen. So he leans over the back of the boat with a piece of rope.
It was not until now that the upper half of the man came back into the boat. His arms were wet and dirty, and he washed them over the side. In his right hand he held something, and he washed that in the river too. It was money. He chinked it once, and he blew upon it once, and he spat upon it once. For luck, he hoarsely said, before he put it in his pocket.
That was the wonderful T.G. Campbell. She writes crime fiction set in the Victorian era, and you can find a link to her website in the description below. There, by the way, is the Mudlark pub. So he's got some coins. They don't float, but they float when they are in something that floats. And of course, what he has seen is a corpse. And he tied this corpse to the back of his boat. So he's one of the people who's looking for dead bodies on the river and brings them ashore, in the hopes of handing them in so that he can get a reward. Now, I'll talk about this in a minute again, but for now I just want to mention we're underneath London Bridge now. This is the only remaining arch of John Rennie's 19th century bridge. The rest was shipped off to Arizona in America when the present structure was built between 1967 and 1972, and there is a plaque explaining that these are Nancy's steps, where the character of the same name was murdered in Oliver Twist. This is only partially right, as Nancy only meets Mr. Brownlow and Rose Maylie here on the steps of the old bridge, and she's overheard by Nora Claypole, who in turn informs Fagin of her treason. Now, spoiler alert for all those who have not read Oliver Twist, you should mute me now for a couple of seconds. But, well, yeah, Nancy was later killed by Bill Sikes in their room in Bethnal Green in the East End of London. So you can unmute me now. We're back on London Bridge now, where we started. So we were talking about mudlarking and about Gaffer Haxham, who, well, there's the dragon, so we're entering the city of London. Gaffer Haxham, who is the father of two children, and he's a waterman he would ferry people up and down the river, across the river, but by the 1860s, improvements in transport meant that the watermen weren't getting quite the work that they used to do. So he needs to supplement his income, and he's one of those scavengers. He represents the scavenger economy that you get in Victorian cities, like the mudlarkers back then. We're on London Bridge now, and as you know, Dickens's London was full of little nooks and crannies. Many of them have disappeared, mainly because of Victorian development. But we've come to London Bridge, and I'm going to mention something of Little Dorrit here. Something that was quite a point of concern in the 1820s, and one of the reasons why you could find dead bodies in the river. So we were talking about not only suicides but prostitute suicides, and in the 1820s there were a number of recorded suicides into the Thames, mainly from Waterloo Bridge upriver. Thomas Hood, the Victorian poet, wrote a poem about this. He called it the Bridge of Sighs. So Waterloo Bridge was known as Bridge of Sighs for a while, but London Bridge also had its share. And in Little Dorrit there is this scene where Amy, who's quite short, she's called Little Dorrit, that's because she's quite short, and her friend Maggie, who's quite tall, they are out on the street. They wanted to go to the Marshalsea prison, just south of here in Borough, another very Dickensian location. Maybe I'll mention a few facts about it in a minute. So they arrived there, they were too late, it was closed, they couldn't get in. So look, there's Tower Bridge, which wouldn't have been familiar to Dickens because it was built in 1894. Anyway, so it's cold at night, they're out on the streets, they couldn't get into the prison. There's the Shard, which would have also not been familiar to Dickens. They're out on the street, disreputable types keep coming past. So they have to get up, they go for a walk, and about 3:30 in the morning they are on London Bridge. And they meet this young woman, a prostitute, and she does exactly what I just mentioned. She intends to do that. She wants to throw herself into the river. She sees Amy and Maggie, and she thinks that they are a child and a mother, and she's very indignant. She goes over to talk to them. She wants to know from this mother why they are out on the streets that late. And Maggie is not really up for that kind of conversation, so the young woman bends down to speak to Amy, who she thinks is a child.
"Kiss the poor lost creature, dear," she said, bending her face, "and tell me where she's taking you." Little Dorrit turned towards her. "Why, my God," she said, recoiling, "you're a woman." "Don't mind that," said Little Dorrit, clasping one of her hands that suddenly released hers. "I am not afraid of you." "Then you had better be," she answered. "Have you no mother?" "No." "No father?" "Yes, a very dear one." "Go home to him, and be afraid of me. Let me go. Good night." "I must thank you first. Let me speak to you as if I really were a child." "You can't do it," said the woman. "You are kind and innocent, but you can't look at me out of a child's eyes. I never should have touched you, but I thought that you were a child." And with a strange, wild cry, she went away.
Thank you once again to T.G. Campbell. She writes crime fiction set in the Victorian era, and you can find a link to her website in the description below. So as a typical Dickens heroine, Amy is very benevolent. But as far as the young woman's concerned, nobody who's an adult could look on her and not see what she does for a living. So yeah, as I mentioned, there was quite a topic back then. A number of Victorians were trying to address this situation, this kind of insecurity and fear and isolation of these women. The age of content for sex was 12, and in 1875 it was raised to 13, and in 1875, it was raised to 13, and in 1885 it was raised to 16, which it is now. So back then they were trying, many Victorians were trying to combat child prostitution by making it illegal. There were various efforts. Dickens himself was involved in a venture which opened in 1847 called Urania Cottage. I will talk about this in a minute, because now we are on Lower Thames Street, and if you look to the right, you can see the church of St Magnus the Martyr. The church was constructed between 1678 and 1676, and before the rebuilding of London Bridge from 1823 to 1831, during which its location was moved upriver, the churchyard of St Magnus the Martyr had formed its roadway approach. And in Oliver Twist, as mentioned, as Nancy heads for her secret meeting with Mr. Brownlow and Rose Maylie on London Bridge, Dickens notes how the tower of Old St. Saviour's Church, now Southwark Cathedral, we mentioned that, we were there, and the spire of St. Magnus, so long the giant waters of the ancient bridge were visible in the gloom. And in fact, a few remnants of the old bridge can be seen in the churchyard of St. Magnus the Martyr, and a detailed model of it is displayed inside the church. So we've walked up Fish Street Hill to the monument itself. I mentioned it in the beginning of this video. So the monument is 202 feet high, that's 61.6 meters, and is the tallest isolated stone column in the world. It was built between 1671 and 1677 to commemorate the dreadful visitation of the Great Fire of London in 1666, which began in Pudding Lane, which is the adjacent street. And Dickens mentions the monument several times. For example, in Martin Chuzzlewit, Tom Pinch gets lost in London and then finds himself hard by the monument, and he's about to ask the attendant for directions. When a couple arrive and pay their tenner, that's 6 pence, to ascend to its viewing platform. And having let them in through the dark little door, the attendant sits down and laughs, and he says they don't know what a many steps there is. It's worth twice the money to stop here. Should you consider a similar ascent, the spiral stone staircase had and still has 311 steps, but the view from the top is worth the effort. I can really recommend it. So now we have a bit of time. I mean, when I shot the video, I obviously didn't think about doing a narrated Dickensian video, so I'm going to jump between topics a bit, but now we can go back to what I was saying about the about child prostitution in the Victorian age. So Dickens was involved in a venture which opened in 1847 called Urania Cottage, alongside Angela Baudet Coutts, a very important Victorian philanthropist. So they started this venture. They would help girls, they would get them out of prostitution, teach them basically how to run their own lives in a more stable way. What is strange, however, is, well, to our eyes at least, is that those who stayed with the program would be shipped off to Australia. Now that seems very strange, but from a Victorian point of view, since the early 19th century, Australia was developing from a penal colony to a proper colony, to proper colonies. People were going there voluntarily, and so this gave them an opportunity for a fresh start. No one would know you there. If they had stayed in London, they would be far too vulnerable going outside. I mean, going outside for a Londoner, going outside of London for a Londoner in those days, sometimes even in these days, was more or less like going abroad. So that was an opportunity, and it absolutely made sense to the Victorian, from the Victorian point of view. So maybe we have another moment to go back to the mudlarking. So here's Pudding Lane, where the Great Fire of London started in 1666. Sorry, but I was talking about Gaffer Hexam and his daughter and his way of trying to scratch a living, because, as I mentioned, he was a waterman. And by the way, we're heading down to Billingsgate Fish Market, the former Billingsgate Fish Market. Nowadays it's on the Isle of Dogs. So mudlarking, nowadays people do it as an interest, but yeah, back then it used to be a way of life. People would scavenge for specific things. Mudlarkers would go to the riverbed at low tide. They would find things that they could sell, and if they couldn't sell them, they could keep them and use them, so they wouldn't have to buy things. An interesting fact: there were people in the area south of London Bridge. There's the monument once again, beautiful. South of London Bridge, they were collecting the pure. So if you've come across this term, collecting the pure, it's dog excrement. They would pick it off the streets, and when you had enough, they would go to the tanners where they made the leather, and there was a huge leather creating industry in the area of Bermondsey, also south of the river, a bit more to the east, downriver. So yeah, Bermondsey, there were most of the tanneries in London back then were there. So they would rub this excrement over the skins to dry it before it was tanned, and that was called purifying the leather, and that's why it was called collecting the pure. So it was short for purifying. So we already mentioned how some people would end up in the river. There's the original Billingsgate Fish Market, the world's largest fish market in the 19th century, and it was relocated to the Isle of Dogs in East London in 1982. And yeah, they would, apart from prostitutes who would throw themselves from Waterloo Bridge or London Bridge, there were quite a lot of seamen who they were coming from ships, from barges. There was a lot of transport of transferring cargoes to the riverside wharves and so on. Oh, hang on, I have to mention this before I go on about mudlarking but dead bodies. So this is a 101 Lower Thames Street, and in the cellar of it you can find Billingsgate Roman house and baths. A Roman bathhouse from Londinium. And yeah, discover the history beneath your feet. You are here, yes, really. I've been down there, and I was down there. It's really worth it. It's worth a visit. You can see the map there on the window, and you can see the various sites like the amphitheatre. This is where Guildhall is now. So this is just the city of London, where, you know, Londinium was just the city of London. And you can see the Forum. You could see the Forum, which I think was Leadenhall Market, where Leadenhall Market is nowadays. So this map is was still quite accurate in terms of the distances between the various locations. So I'm not quite sure. I think it was it was discovered sometime in the Victorian area, the Roman bath, in the Victorian era. Sorry, the Roman bath. I'm gonna have to look up when exactly. I think it might have been the 1870s, but I don't want to say anything wrong here. So I'm gonna have to look that up. So I'm not sure if Dickens knew about that one. He did know about another Roman bath that was, I think, that was close to the Strand, the Fleet Street. But I'm gonna have to look that up too. Not quite sure about that, I have to admit. So I was talking about sailors. They'd end up in the river dead, some of them. So as a sailor, you would have been engaged for the voyage only. So they were coming ashore after a long journey. They'd be paid off, and the first thing they were going to do was to go to the pub, head to the pub for companionship and alcohol, sex. And they'd come out of the pub having drunk more than they had been drinking for a long while. They'd be hot from the alcohol, from the air, from the bodies, and loose on their legs. And many of them would, or some of them would suffer, from the cold, and they would have a heart attack. And that was one of the reasons why some bodies of sailors, some dead bodies of sailors would end up in the river. But a number of them would be through other means, including suicide, as I mentioned. And that is the link to the story of Little Dorrit and the young prostitute. So the hung, drawn and quartered pub. And there's this lovely quote by Samuel Pepys. I went to see Major General Harrison hung, drawn and quartered. He was looking as cheerful as any man could in that condition. On the 13th of October 1660. And we are in an area that is, of course, very much associated with Samuel Pepys, the famous diarist. He lived close by and he worked close by, and but this is not a Pepys walk. Maybe I'll record another one. Maybe I'll do another one. The good thing is about these videos, I recorded some of these London walks, where I just filmed while I walked certain routes, certain streets, and then I had kind of this route in mind, but I didn't talk, so I just captured the atmosphere. And the good thing is you can turn many of these videos into various walks, like this one, turning it into a Dickens walk. But I could also turn it, tell other stories about other people, about other historical facts. So that's the beauty of London. And I could maybe take another one of my videos and turn this one into a Dickens walk. Well, I hope you enjoyed so far, but we're not quite done yet. We are heading towards the Tower of London, actually, and you can already see, there it is. You can already see it from here, and a bit of bit of Tower Bridge just next to it, but as I said, Tower Bridge was not a familiar sight to Dickens because it didn't exist during his lifetime. So these sundry buildings that collectively make up the Tower of London, it was founded by William the Conqueror in the 11th century, and there's All Hallows by the Tower. The church also has a connection to Samuel Pepys. I think it's the oldest parish church in the city of London, but I'm gonna have to look that up too. I can't remember, can't keep everything in my head. So here, by the way, here's the Liberty Bounce, an atmospheric public house with an interior full of references to the history of the area, kind of naval interior, very lovely. So the Tower of London, yeah, if you ever get the chance, you should have a pint there. Maybe we can meet up. Maybe we can meet up there and have a pint. Just let me know. Leave a comment in the leave a comment below. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, all these things, all this stuff. Leave a comment in the comment section below, and then we can arrange for a walk together, a walk through London, maybe a Dickensian walk, maybe something else, haunted London, a Ripper walk, whatever there is, whatever you wish me to do. Yeah, you can get in touch with me. By the way, you can get in touch with me via my website, which is londonbeyondtimeandplace.com, and I'd be very happy to have you as a visitor on my site, and maybe to have you as a viewer or listener on some of my talks. I have I've had a lot of guests, still do, on my talk series, Talks Beyond Time and Place, which are all about London and its history and its myths and mysterious, secret, hidden stories and nooks and crannies, and yeah, quite a lot of very interesting, fascinating guests. And I'm not done with that yet. And of course, I also offer some self-guided walks. Among them, a walk along the South Bank. So part of it, we've already walked a part of it, the one on the southern side of the river, and the walk also ends at where we are going to end our walk today, but we are coming from the other direction. Yeah, so if you like that, I would be very happy if you come to my shop, visit my shop on my website, londonbeyondtimeandplace.com, and have a look at my self-guided walks. And as I said, maybe download one, purchase one. I'd be very glad, very happy about that. And yeah, I'm always up for a proper walk in good company with a pint at the end. So yeah, leave a comment in the comment section and we'll see what we can do. So here's Tower Hill Underground Station. Interestingly enough, quite often a starting point for Ripper tours, although the Ripper did not really have a connection to Tower Hill, has a connection to Tower Hill or the Tower. But I think maybe it's got something to do with tourists. They want to still be in zone 1 or and start in an area that is kind of a tourist area. Not quite sure if they would really, if they would go out to Aldgate East or Liverpool Street or Whitechapel to start a Ripper tour. I think it'd be more safe as a tour guide to start here, although it's got not that much to do with the Ripper. Most of them, they stay in the city. They don't even really go into the East End, which I don't really like, but yeah. This was part of the old Roman wall, by the way, and now we're gonna have to go back to Dickens.
I appreciate it, bro.
So yeah, Sorry for losing my train of thought here and jumping to other topics. So the Tower of London, is there a Dickens connection? Of course there is. As I said, the Tower of London was founded by William the Conqueror in the 11th century, and the buildings that was added to by successive monarchs. The site has been a royal palace, but of course it is best known as a place of imprisonment and execution. The names of those who have been incarcerated behind its grim grey walls read like a who's who of English history, and I also have a short video on my YouTube channel about two scary stories from the Tower of London. Yeah, if you like, you can just jump over and have a look. I'd be very happy, very glad about that, and maybe add a like or a comment. Give me a like, a thumbs up, or a comment. So it was here in a dreary room whose thick stone walls shut out the hum of life and made a stillness which the records left by former prisoners with those silent witnesses seemed to deepen and intensify, that Lord George Gordon languished in Barnaby Rudge. And in David Copperfield, which Dickens wrote from 1849 to 1850, whilst managing Clara Peggotty's affairs, David varied the legal character of these proceedings by going to see the Tower of London, just like we are doing now. Something that Dickens probably witnessed, or maybe not in person, but surely knew about during his time, was on the evening of the 30th of October 1841, calamity almost overtook the ancient fortress because the Boyer Tower caught fire on that evening. And the tower's 9 had operated fire engines. They were quickly brought into action, but they seemed to be useless. There was only sufficient water to feed one of them, and the flames began to spread, and crowds gathered on Tower Hill where we had just been. And they wanted to watch the conflagration, and so to avoid the loss of life, the Major Elrington, the officer in charge, he sent for the assistance of the London Fire Engine Establishment, and he gave orders that no one was to be admitted to the tower. And as the magazine, the satirical magazine Punch, reported, military rule knows no exceptions. The orders given were executed to the letter by preventing the ingress of the fireman, leaving the fire to devour at its leisure the enormous meal that fate had prepared for it. So when the firefighters were finally admitted, they could do very little. They could aim their hoses on those buildings that had not yet caught fire, so leaving the rest to be consumed by the flames. And the spectators on Tower Hill, they watched with a horrified fascination. And according to one witness, it was a majestic sight, and many around us observed, I shall not forget this fire, even on my deathbed. And the appearance of today's Tower of London as a complex of medieval buildings is largely the result of the restoration that followed the disaster. So what we see today is a result of the restoration that followed the fire on the evening of the 30th of October 1841. And as I said, Dickens probably knew about this. I don't know if he was a witness. Don't think he was, but we don't know. Maybe we can find out. But he surely knew about this fire and about the effect it had on the Tower of London. So we're heading to our final stop on this walk. We're heading to St Katharine Docks. So St Katharine Docks they would have been familiar to Dickens, of course. It was part of the dock area of the Port of London, and a very busy area. It has changed, obviously, since then, but you can still see a number of, some of these buildings around here. They used to be wharves and warehouses, and it's a very lovely area, actually, today, with a lot of restaurants, and it has a really nice atmosphere. I really like it. So that's one of the reasons why I decided, when I recorded this walk, to include it in the video. So this is St Katharine Docks. You can see the boats. I do know for a fact that there is you can rent some of these boats, or at least one of them, to sleep there, as a kind of Airbnb. So if you like that, if you wish to spend your holiday, your London stay on a boat, without being out on the river or on the sea, but in the safety of the docks, this might be just right for you. I'm not quite sure, I have to admit, not quite sure how. I think there's like showers and toilets for all those who live and sleep on the boats. I don't think they are on the boats, but like a I don't know, bathroom area somewhere around here where you have to share showers and toilets. But that's similar to being on a camping site, so maybe that is of interest for some of you. So yeah, we're walking to St Katharine Docks, and maybe some of you have already guessed where we are heading to finish this Dickensian walk. And it's quite funny, actually, because, as I said, when I recorded this video, I didn't plan to turn it into a Dickens video, but it just worked quite well. The different topics, the different sites, the different locations, the different stories and connections to Dickens, that the last stop is a really good stop for ending a Dickens walk. So yeah, I'm just turning around here for a bit, and just up there where you can see the street, this is East Smithfield, and this is kind of the beginning of the East End of London. So if you walk out of St Katharine Docks up there, you are on a busy street, and if you follow that street, you will come to the areas of Whitechapel, Wapping and Stepney, and you are already in the heart of the East End. And I mean, to be honest, there are a lot of East End locations connected to Dickens. You can't really read Dickens without coming across the East End, but of course the East End has a lot of other interesting stories and a lot of history. I personally I'm very fond of the East End. Not in a way that I find it beautiful, but it's the area that I feel most connected to. So, but we're still in St Katharine Docks, and over there is our final stop. This is the way, once again, for all of those who want to find this. It may have been a bit confusing for all those who have never been to this area, or have never been to London in general, but especially to this area. So if you haven't been here before, it might be helpful to re-watch the last bit to find the way to our final stop, which is a must for all lovers of Dickens, all of those who like to read Dickens and like the man and his stories. So we have to cross this little bridge. It's a very, very small bridge, actually, and I know some people have had trouble crossing it because they are afraid of falling into the water. But I mean, you can walk around the dock the other way around and still arrive here. So we are at the Dickens Inn, originally a warehouse. It was formerly opened as a pub in 1976 by Charles Dickens' great-grandson Cedric Charles Dickens. And he said that his great-grandfather would have loved this inn. So he most certainly would have liked it. I do. So I'm going to finish this walk here at the Dickens Inn and toast to the author and to you. I hope you enjoyed this Dickens walk through London, and you can, as I mentioned, you can find parts of it in my self-guided walk, Strange Tales from the River Thames, a walk along the South Bank. And hope to see you soon, maybe in this lovely and calm area of St Katharine Docks in the Dickens Inn. Thank you very much, and bye.